He gave his heart for love. Jack and Emma had been inseparable since childhood. They spent all their time together, strolling through the quiet streets of their small town, dreaming under the clouds that occasionally covered the sun, and making plans for a future that seemed limitless. Even in their school years, they confidently talked about marriage and were convinced their love would last forever. Throughout their school years, they were always together, unlike their classmates, who sometimes changed their affections several times a year. In their early years, Jack and Emma often became the target of teasing. They were called bride and groom, and some boys purposely provoked them to see how far Jack would go to protect his friend. But he, despite being outnumbered, would often fight to defend Emma's honor. "I'm not weak," Emma would say with a smile, leaning against an old oak tree and giving their bullies a confident look. She was not only brilliant but also possessed remarkable determination. In such moments she always stood by Jack, defending their shared world, which meant far more to them than others could understand. Over time things began to change. Their classmates grew up, and the jokes that once targeted them gradually faded away. Now many girls, and sometimes even boys, looked at the happy couple with envy. They seemed like an unbreakable union, destined to be together no matter what. Jack joined a boxing club, and this instantly changed his status at school. Fewer bullies, more friends. His confidence, backed by strength, made him not only a leader but also someone others sought for support. Emma, on the other hand, excelled in her studies. She was one of the top students in the class, earning praise from teachers and becoming a role model for her peers. Together, they were like two halves of the same coin, so different, yet perfectly complementing each other. The old oak in the schoolyard became their secret refuge. Here Jack, smiling as he twirled a plucked leaf in his hands, would often say, "When we grow up, I'll marry you. We'll always be together, no matter what. And I'll be the happiest bride," Emma would reply, laughing and ruffling his hair. Childhood seemed endless to them, and the future, unchanging like the branches of their favorite tree. A bird sang somewhere on the branch and acorns lay underfoot, as if dreaming of a new beginning. But they had no idea that challenges lay ahead that could change everything they held so dear. Years later, Jack and Emma went to college, and their relationship grew even stronger. They spent a lot of time together, going on dates, watching movies, walking around the city, and savoring every moment. They rented a small, cozy apartment on the top floor of an old brick building. In the living room lay a worn but warm carpet that had long lost its original color, but created a sense of comfort. By the window stood an old sofa with slightly sunken cushions, where they loved watching movies on long evenings, wrapped in a single blanket. The kitchen was small, with peeling paint on the cabinets, but Emma decorated it with potted greens to add a bit of life. The walls were adorned with photos from their travels and magazine clippings Emma had pinned to make the space truly feel like their home. Life was modest but filled with happy moments. Jack got a job as a bartender at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The place, though humble, was always bustling. Wooden tables, the warm glow of vintage lamps, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee created a cozy atmosphere. The walls were decorated with photos of local landmarks, and regular customers often gathered at the counter, exchanging news. Jack's colleagues were friendly, each with their own character. The elderly cook Harry, who always joked that he loved cooking almost as much as he loved silence, often shared useful tips with Jack and told stories about his wild youth when he worked in the city's finest kitchens. His experience commanded respect, and his good-natured smile and grumbling added a special charm. The waitress Sophie, a young girl with bright red hair and a kind smile, quickly found common ground with him. Her energy and ability to connect with any customer were admirable. She could easily win over even the most demanding guests, turning every service into an art. Sometimes she looked at Jack with curiosity, asking questions about his life and dreams, as if trying to understand what lay behind his calm and reserved demeanor. They often stayed alone after closing. The cafe would fall silent, with only the sound of dripping water from a poorly tightened faucet and the faint hum of the coffee machine. "You know, Jack," she once said, wiping the counter, "you have this rare quality, the ability to listen. It's great for a bartender. Just don't forget that your dreams are important too." She looked at him with a slight smile, her eyes filled with genuine empathy. Jack nodded, but deep down he felt the weight of that empathy. He thought about his dreams, those that once mattered but had now given way to the need to work and take care of the future with Emma. Sophie noticed his thoughtful expression and softly added, "Just remember, life isn't just about work. We all need our little corner of happiness." One evening, after an especially tough day, Jack sat at the small kitchen table, barely able to keep his eyes open. His hands lay on the table, heavy as if filled with lead. His head drooped, and his thoughts tangled from exhaustion. The dim light of the lamp cast soft shadows on the walls, creating a cozy yet oppressive atmosphere. "You look so tired," Emma noted gently, placing a cup of hot tea in front of him. Her voice was soft, but the concern in her eyes betrayed her worry. She gently squeezed his hand, trying to convey warmth and care. Jack looked up at her, his eyes filled with exhaustion but also boundless love. "It's all for us, so that we have everything we need," he said hoarsely, his lips forming a weak smile that quickly disappeared. He looked at her as if seeking confirmation that it was all worth it. Emma gently brushed a strand of hair from his face, noticing the deep shadows under his eyes. "You always do everything for us. But Jack, you need to take care of yourself too. I can help. I'll find a part-time job, and we'll manage together." Her voice was full of determination, yet laced with worry. Jack smiled, ruffling her hair slightly. "You already do more than you can imagine. Just being here is the most important thing." His voice was tired, but his attachment and devotion remained unchanged. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with tenderness. At that moment, she realized just how important he was to her, how he had become her rock and protector in everything. She gently touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his skin after a long workday. "I'll always be here, Jack. We'll get through this together," she whispered. Evening covered the city with its velvety blanket, muffled street noises, distant voices of passers-by, and the hum of cars filling the night. They sat together, not needing words, simply enjoying the moment of silence and warmth. The clock on the wall slowly ticked away the time, but at that moment it seemed to stand still. Jack closed his eyes, his breathing steady, and Emma realized how exhausted he truly was. She wanted to stop the world to give him a break, but all she could do was be there. They sat together in their small apartment, feeling each other's warmth and believing that a bright future awaited them despite all the challenges. Their happiness seemed limitless, until tragedy struck. Jack still couldn't understand how everything went so wrong. It all started on an ordinary workday when Sophie, the waitress from the cafe, suggested staying after the shift to celebrate her birthday with the team. He felt exhausted but didn't want to seem boring, so he agreed. Just a couple of hours, he thought. The evening passed in a relaxed atmosphere. Laughter, soft music, a few glasses of wine. Everyone was in high spirits, moving between tables and chatting carefree. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and vanilla dessert, specially prepared by the chef for the occasion. Jack felt the tension of the day slowly fading and, taking a moment, went to the cooler to pour himself some water. For a brief moment he was alone, enjoying the quiet that contrasted with the noise of the cafe. Sophie, with a glass of wine in hand, approached him. Her steps were barely audible on the wooden floor, as if she were gliding rather than walking. Her bright red hair, illuminated by the soft glow of string lights, shimmered like flames, drawing attention. She looked relaxed, her eyes sparkling from the wine and the overall ambience of the evening, but there was something in her gaze that sparked a vague unease within Jack. "Jack, you're always so serious at work. Relax, it's a party," she said in a slightly husky voice, leaning in a little closer than necessary. Her lips curled into a playful smile, and her eyes studied his face intently, as if searching for something more than just a response. He smiled back, trying to hide his discomfort. "You know, I just have a lot on my plate. Work, studies. Sometimes I feel like I can't handle it all." He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze, trying to steer the conversation into safer territory, but the feeling of unease within him grew stronger by the second. Sophie looked at him closely, her voice softening. "I think you don't think about yourself enough. You're so kind, Jack, but even you can't carry everything alone." Her words made him think. The conversation continued, and before he realized it, work topics turned into more personal ones. She shared her dreams of opening her own cafe, and how she sometimes felt lonely despite the crowd of people around her. When they stepped outside for some fresh air, a quietness settled between them, broken only by the muffled sounds from inside the cafe. Jack nervously fidgeted with the sleeve of his shirt, feeling the strange tension lingering in the air. Sophie remained silent, but her eyes studied his face with an unexpected softness that hinted at something more than just friendly interest. In her gaze he saw a mixture of curiosity, anticipation, and something he couldn't quite define. A light breeze stirred her hair, and she stepped closer, almost touching his shoulder. He felt the space between them shrink to nothing, and his breathing quickened involuntarily. "You're an amazing person, Jack," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth and a slight tremor. She leaned in a little closer, and before he could react, her lips brushed against his. The moment was so unexpected, as if the world had frozen, and all sounds around them disappeared. Jack froze, his heart pounding, his thoughts tangled. In that instant, he felt a strange mix of confusion, guilt, and to his horror, a fleeting sense of pleasure that he couldn't immediately suppress. He wanted to stop it, to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. "Sophie, this is wrong," he finally said, pulling away. His voice filled more with despair than certainty. He looked at her, trying to find an explanation for what had just happened. Her eyes grew misty, and she nervously gripped the wine glass in her hand, as if it could hide her embarrassment and awkwardness. "I'm sorry." "It was a moment of weakness," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Jack noticed regret mixed with something else in her gaze, something that made him shudder inside. He watched as she hesitated for a moment, then, trying to maintain an air of composure, returned to the others. Jack couldn't take his eyes off her retreating figure, feeling guilt and anxiety grow within him. Jack stood alone, clenching his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. One thought kept spinning in his head. How could I let this happen? His chest tightened and his breathing grew heavier. He ran a hand over his face, trying to pull himself together, but the sensation of her lips on his was still too vivid. The celebration continued around him. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, but it all felt distant, as if he had entered another reality where his mistake had become an inescapable truth. He knew this night would leave a mark he couldn't erase from his memory or heart. His heart, which belonged to Emma. Or did it? Emma found out by accident. A few days after the party, one of Sophie's co-workers, whom she followed on social media, posted pictures from the event. Emma scrolled through the cheerful snapshots, enjoying the lively atmosphere until her eyes landed on one particular photo. In it, Sophie and Jack stood close together, their poses and facial expressions hinting at something more than just friendship. At first, Emma tried to convince herself it was just an awkward moment, a random shot. But uncertainty and anxiety grew with each passing minute. She decided to call her best friend, Lisa, who knew much about the cafe's happenings. "Lisa, I need to talk." Emma's voice trembled and she barely held back tears. "I saw the party photos. Be honest. Did something happen?" Lisa paused for a few seconds, as if weighing whether to tell the truth. Finally, she answered softly, "Emma, you need to know. Sophie, they kissed." "I'm so sorry." Those words hit like a punch. Emma felt her heart clench in pain, the ground beneath her feet seemingly giving way. She immediately found the very picture that now symbolized betrayal. The conversation with Lisa only confirmed her worst fears. Her hands trembled and one question echoed in her mind. Why did he do this? When Jack walked into their apartment, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, eyes red from crying. Her phone lay on the table, the damning picture displayed on the screen. His heart sank. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the air had become thick and heavy. "Emma." His voice was uncertain, as if he already knew that no words could fix what had happened. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain, anger, and disappointment. "Don't say a word," she whispered, but there was more threat in her voice than in a scream. She stood up from the table, her fingers trembling as she pointed at the phone. Is this true? Did you really do this? Jack stepped forward, but each step felt like a hammer blow, heavy and agonizing. His heart pounded, his mouth went dry. Emma, it was a mistake. I don't know how it happened. His voice shook, and he didn't even believe his own words. You don't know. She cut him off, her voice rising, thunderous in the quiet apartment. Anger and hurt filled her eyes. You don't even understand how it happened? You destroyed everything we built for years. Every promise, every moment I thought was special. How could you, Jack? How? He felt her words cut through him, tearing him apart, but he tried to stay composed. It meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness. Emma, you have to believe me. You mean everything to me. Emma let out a bitter laugh, but there was nothing joyful in it. It was full of sarcasm and despair. Everything? If I meant everything to you, you wouldn't have done this. You would have stopped. You would have thought about me, about us, but you didn't. You didn't even try. Her voice cracked and tears welled up in her eyes again. She wiped them away quickly, as if trying to erase the pain along with them. Jack reached out to her, but she pulled away sharply, as if his touch would cause her even more pain. She clenched her fists, trying to stop the trembling, but her shoulders betrayed her emotions. Emma, please. Give me a chance to fix this. I love you. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading, but it lacked the confidence it once held. He looked at her with desperation, guilt swirling in his eyes, but Emma only pressed her lips together tighter, as if holding back a flood of emotions. She looked at him with bitterness and exhaustion, as if his words were the final blow. Her tear-filled eyes stared at him as though he were a stranger. Love? Jack, this isn't love. This is betrayal. I believed in you with all my heart. I thought we were a team, that nothing could break us. And now? Now I look at you and I don't recognize you. You've become a stranger to me, Jack. Her voice broke, carrying more pain than anger. Her voice softened, but every word was like a knife. You destroyed everything we built. And you know what hurts the most? I still love you. But I can't forget this. I can't live with this pain. Leave. Please just go. Jack froze, hoping she would change her mind, but her gaze was cold and unyielding. Finally, he slowly turned and headed for the door. Each of his steps echoed through the empty apartment, as if the sound was the last reminder of what they once had. When the door closed behind him, Emma collapsed to the floor, covering her face with her hands. Her loud sobs filled the silence, as if trying to fill the void Jack had left behind. Her heart was breaking, and she knew there was no other way. Their story had ended, leaving behind only pain. After the truth came to light, Emma felt empty. She avoided talking to Jack. Every call went unanswered, and messages remained unread. Her phone became an enemy. The notification sounds triggered irritation and sometimes tears. Everything around her seemed to remind her of what they had lost. But Jack didn't give up. One evening, when the sun had already set behind the horizon, he stood at her apartment door, holding a bouquet of her favorite lilies and a box of chocolates, the same one she always bought on tough days. Rain slowly dripped down his coat, but he didn't move, as if the rain was his punishment. Emma, please give me a chance to explain. His voice trembled, just like when she had first asked about the kiss. Emma slowly opened the door, her eyes swollen from crying, holding a cup of cold tea in her hands. She looked at him as if she were seeing a stranger. What do you want to explain, Jack? Her voice was cold and distant, but inside she was boiling. You made your choice. He lowered his eyes, gripping the stems of the lilies so tightly they nearly broke. It was a mistake, he finally said. I don't even know how it happened, but I swear it meant nothing. You are everything to me. Emma took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. She averted her gaze, looking at the old painting on the wall they had hung together a year ago. You know what's most painful? I trusted you. I thought we were a team. And now I'm not even sure I know you. Jack took a step forward, but she quickly stopped him with her hand. Her touch was soft but firm. Don't. I need time to figure things out. Leave. He stood there, hoping for her decision. Her eyes revealed no emotion except exhaustion. Finally, he realized she wouldn't budge. Clutching the bouquet, he slowly turned and walked away. The sound of the closing door echoed through her empty apartment. After that conversation, Emma immersed herself in her thoughts. Her friends tried to support her, advising her to start anew. Jack moved in with his friend after the breakup, hoping a change of scenery would help him move on. His friends tried to support him, inviting him to parties and suggesting distractions, but even in noisy crowds, Jack felt alone. Everything reminded him of Emma. Every place, every song, every stranger's smile brought him back to the past. He often caught himself mentally talking to her, imagining she was still there. One day, passing by their favorite cafe, he stopped by the window. Inside, everything was just as it used to be. Warm lighting, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, quiet laughter. A couple sat at their usual spot, laughing and holding hands, and in that moment, Jack felt the harsh sting of reality. His heart clenched and he realized he had lost not just love, but a part of himself. Memories flooded back. Long conversations, smiles, touches. He slowly stepped away from the window, feeling the cold emptiness grow inside him. Returning to his friend's apartment, he sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, realizing that neither a change of place nor distractions could erase Emma from his heart. A dull pain grew inside him, one he had yet to learn how to handle. The rain started drizzling outside, droplets running down the window, mirroring his own tears. Jack sighed and, lowering his head, walked on, realizing that forgetting wouldn't come quickly, and perhaps never at all. The stress and emotional turmoil took their toll. Emma started noticing how her strength slowly but surely drained away. Everyday tasks became overwhelming. Every movement felt heavy, as if an invisible weight pressed on her shoulders. Constant fatigue, weakness, shortness of breath. She tried to convince herself it was just nerves, but the deep shadows under her eyes and the cold that seeped into her bones told a different story. One day her body gave out. In the middle of a busy street, her legs gave way, colorful spots blurred her vision, and Emma collapsed onto the pavement. Bystanders, seeing her helpless body, panicked and called an ambulance, while she, drifting out of consciousness, heard only distant, anxious voices. She was urgently taken to the hospital. The blindingly white walls, the flickering corridor lights, the abrupt commands of doctors, all blended into chaos in her mind. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded irregularly, and fear settled inside her, gripping her with icy fingers. After an endless series of tests and examinations, the doctor uttered words that echoed through her entire being. Serious heart problems caused by stress and prolonged emotional exhaustion. Her head spun and she struggled to breathe. A heart transplant was her only chance, but there was almost no time left to find a donor. "Doctor, how much time do we have?" her mother asked through tears, clutching Emma's hands, which felt icy and lifeless. Her voice trembled as if every word caused unbearable pain. Her eyes, full of plea and fear, darted across the doctor's face, searching for even the faintest glimmer of hope. Despair pounded in her chest, tearing her apart, but she tried her best to remain composed for her daughter. "Unfortunately, no more than a week," the doctor replied, lowering his eyes to the papers, as if hoping to avoid the reflection of fear in the woman's eyes. His voice was quiet, almost lifeless, but it carried an inevitability that made hearts sink. Emma's mother let out a quiet sob, squeezing her daughter's hand even tighter, as if trying to keep her in this world for just a little longer. Emma lay on the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, which seemed infinitely distant, as if it separated her from reality. Her thoughts drifted between the past and the future, lingering on memories that now seemed so fragile and elusive. She remembered walking through the autumn park with Jack, crunching colorful leaves underfoot, his laughter when she smeared ice cream on her nose, and how they made wishes while watching falling stars. But now all these moments felt like a distant illusion, ghosts of the past she could never return to. Her breathing grew shallow, her chest tightened with anxious emptiness, and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, ready to fall at any moment. Her mother entered the room, holding a crumpled tissue from constant squeezing. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she held herself together, trying not to show her anxiety. "Sweetheart, we'll find a solution. Just hold on." Her voice was soft, but a thin thread of desperation wove through it. She sat on the edge of the bed, squeezing Emma's hand as if trying to transfer the last remnants of her strength. Emma managed a weak smile. "Mama, I'm scared. I'm not ready." "You're strong," her mother replied, sitting beside her. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound confident. "We won't let you give up." Meanwhile, the doctors began preparing Emma for surgery. But every minute without a donor felt like an eternity. The family sent out pleas for help everywhere, reaching out to charities, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers on social media. Each message, every call, brought a flicker of hope that was quickly extinguished by cold despair. Time slipped away mercilessly, and with each passing day, hope dwindled, leaving only pain and fear of the unknown. The phone rang one ordinary evening when Jack was walking down the street. A light drizzle fell, but he barely noticed it. Droplets ran down his face, mixing with damp strands of hair, but his thoughts were far away, returning again and again to Emma. Her face, her voice, that last conversation when she had closed the door in front of him. A heavy lump formed in his throat, and his footsteps echoed emptily against the wet pavement. He hardly noticed the world around him until he felt the phone vibrate in his pocket. Jack glanced at the screen. It was Mike, their mutual friend. Mike usually didn't call without a reason. "Jack, we need to talk." Mike's voice was serious, tense even, with none of the usual lightheartedness Jack was used to. "What's wrong?" he asked, feeling his heartbeat quicken. A painful silence stretched on the other end of the line for several agonizing seconds. "Emma. She's in the hospital. She has serious heart issues. Jack, it's really bad. Her condition is critical." He stopped in the middle of the street, his breathing ragged, the ground seeming to vanish beneath his feet. For a few moments he couldn't utter a word, as if someone had gripped his throat in an iron vice. The streetlights blurred before his eyes, and the raindrops suddenly felt colder. "Which hospital?" was all he could manage to ask. Mike gave him the address, and Jack immediately dropped the call and ran. The road to the hospital was a blur. He remembered only the cold wind hitting his face and his own thoughts screaming, "She can't die. Emma can't leave me." When he reached the hospital, he was met by her mother. Her face was haggard, with dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept for days. Her shoulders were slumped, and her hands, which she kept clenching and unclenching, trembled. Her eyes, swollen from tears, looked at him with desperation. She didn't say a word, just shook her head. And that was enough for him to understand. They were running out of time. The doctors had confirmed that Emma urgently needed a heart transplant, but a donor had yet to be found. He approached the doctor standing at the reception desk, flipping through paperwork. "Is there any chance at all?" he asked, struggling to contain his panic. The doctor looked at him with exhaustion. "There is a chance, but time is running out. We're doing everything we can, but there are no donors available right now." Jack closed his eyes, trying to find a solution, and then it came to him. He opened his eyes and looked at the doctor. "I can be the donor. Test me." The doctor frowned. "Do you understand what you're saying? This is irreversible. You won't survive the operation." "I understand, and I'm ready. Please check if I'm a match," Jack said firmly. The doctor studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his thoughts, but eventually nodded. Jack was led to a room where tests were conducted. Everything happened so quickly that he barely had time to process it. While the tests were being done, he stood by her hospital room door. Through the small window he could see Emma. She lay on the bed, her face pale, her eyes closed. He couldn't go inside, but all he wanted was to tell her she would live. A few hours later the results confirmed it. He was a match. The doctor asked him once more, "Are you sure? This is your final decision?" "Yes," Jack replied without hesitation. "She has to live." The doctor hesitated for a moment, as if considering his words. His face remained expressionless, but a flicker of respect and perhaps sympathy appeared in his eyes. Jack asked the doctor not to tell Emma. He knew she wouldn't accept his sacrifice, but it didn't matter to him. Before the preparations began, Jack approached the registration desk. His fists clenched tightly, as if to hold on to his resolve. "I need a piece of paper and a pen," he said to the nurse on duty, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked at him with slight surprise but handed him what he needed without question. He sat at a small table nearby and slowly began to write. Each word was heavy, but he knew he had to leave her with something to help her understand his choice. When he finished, he folded the note, carefully signed her name, and handed it to the nurse. "Make sure she gets this when it's over." When Emma opened her eyes, she couldn't immediately understand where she was. The light was blinding, and the sounds around her were muffled, as if she were underwater. Her body felt foreign, weak, and heavy, but inside, her heart beat steadily and confidently. It was a strange feeling, as if she had been reborn. Her first thought was, "I'm alive." But then others followed. "Someone sacrificed their life for me." Why? Who was it? Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand so tightly, as if afraid to lose her again. Her face reflected exhaustion and relief, as if she had endured an endless nightmare and finally saw the light. The deep wrinkles etched across her forehead seemed more pronounced, and her trembling lips revealed the tension of the past days. Tears of joy mixed with the unspoken fear that still lingered within her. "You're alive, sweetheart. You made it," she whispered, leaning closer to gently stroke Emma's cheek. Her voice was filled with love and immeasurable relief, but behind it lurked worry about what lay ahead. "I was so scared. I prayed so hard for you to wake up." Emma tried to smile, but tears welled up in her eyes, hot and unstoppable. She looked at the ceiling, as if trying to grasp the reality of what had happened. "Mom, I don't even know how to put this into words. Feels so strange. To feel alive again. I can hear my heart, but it's not mine. It's so terrifying. And yet so incredible." Her mother nodded, gently running her fingers through Emma's hair, her touch warm and familiar, as if trying to convince Emma that everything could still be okay. "Don't think about that now. Just rest, darling. We'll figure everything out when you regain your strength." But her voice betrayed her concern, and Emma could tell that her mother was grappling with the same questions she was. With each passing day, Emma felt her strength gradually returning. She could sit up for longer periods without assistance and even take a few steps around the room, but the unease never left her. She often caught herself thinking that each heartbeat reminded her of someone else's presence. Someone had died so she could live. That person had given their life for her, and she needed to know who it was. Long nights were spent lying awake, listening to the quiet rhythm of her heart, trying to imagine who her savior had been. A few days later, when she could finally sit up in bed, the doctor entered the room holding an envelope. His face was calm, but a hint of tension lingered in his eyes, making her tense up. "What is this?" Emma asked, staring at the envelope. Her voice cracked on the last words, and she felt a tight knot form in her chest from the anxious anticipation. "It's from the donor," the doctor said quietly, placing the letter on the bedside table next to her. He lingered for a moment as if wanting to say something more, but after a sigh, he left the room, leaving her alone with that piece of paper. Emma froze, staring at the small envelope that seemed to hold all the answers to her questions. Inside, she felt a mix of fear and anticipation tightening around her heart. She reached out but hesitated, unable to take it right away. Thoughts raced through her mind. Who was it? Why did they do this? What did they write to me? Her fingers trembled slightly as she finally mustered the courage to take the letter. It felt surprisingly light, but the weight of its meaning was overwhelming. She traced her finger along the edge, feeling the uneven seal, and closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, preparing herself to read what could change her life forever. With trembling hands, Emma opened the envelope, her heart pounding in her chest as if trying to guess what lay inside. As she unfolded the piece of paper, her breath caught. She instantly recognized the handwriting, those familiar, slightly messy lines she had seen countless times before in the notes Jack used to leave her, on the fridge, in textbooks, on scraps of paper tucked into her pockets. Her fingers gently smoothed the letter, and her eyes scanned the words. "I made many mistakes and hurt you, but my love for you has always been real. Now I will always be with you. Take care of yourself, and know that I will always love you." The words, written in steady, firm strokes, reached deep into her soul, making her heart ache with the realization that he was gone forever. Her lips trembled and hot tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving tiny wet spots on the words that now connected her to him. She ran her fingers over the letters, as if she could feel the warmth of his hand when he wrote them. Every phrase resonated with the dull pain in her chest, reminding her with every breath of his sacrifice. Her shoulders shook with sobs, her breathing ragged as the emptiness inside her filled with an unbearable longing for him. A storm of emotions raged within her. Love, regret, anger at him for making such a decision, and at the same time gratitude mixed with deep loss. It felt as if he were here, standing beside her with those warm eyes and saying, "You're stronger than you think. I'll always be with you. How could you give everything up for me?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. Flashes of memories rushed through her mind. Their first kiss in the rain, with droplets sliding down their faces, blending with their laughter and happiness. She remembered how he held her close on chilly autumn evenings as they sat on their old couch, sharing their deepest dreams and planning a future that would never come true. Her mind painted pictures of his caring gaze when he gently tucked her hair behind her ear, and the warmth of his touch that always made her feel safe. She could hear his voice filled with love and hope, promising they would overcome everything together. But now he was gone, leaving behind a part of himself, making the impossible possible so she could go on living. It felt as though his presence lingered in the air of the hospital room, in every breath she took, in every beat of her new heart that had become the invisible thread binding them forever. Emma clutched the letter tighter, feeling it tremble in her hands as if his soul was still nearby. She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to that feeling. Jack would always be with her, in her heart, in every beat that now belonged to them both. The silence of the room was broken only by the soft ticking of the clock, counting down the seconds of her new life, gifted at a cost she could never fully comprehend. She didn't know how to move forward without him, but she knew he would want her to be happy, and for him she had to try. She loosened her grip, allowing the paper to crumple slightly in her palm. Two emotions battled within her: grief over his loss and the need to move forward. She realized she couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, but alongside them grew a strange sense of strength, the strength he had passed on to her, the strength that was now a part of who she was. Outside, the sun slowly rose, painting the sky in warm shades, a reminder that she had an entire life ahead of her. She traced her fingers over the envelope, as if promising herself that she would fulfill his wish, to be happy no matter what. This is a story of devotion, redemption, and true love. Jack's selfless act became a symbol of unconditional love, and Emma found a new purpose in life, cherishing every moment and keeping the memory of the man who gave her everything alive in her heart. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.